the true pagan origin of the devil, the Persian god of evil who became Satan. The figure you know as Satan didn't start in a Hebrew temple or a Christian monastery. He wasn't born from Jewish scripture or medieval Christian art. The devil, as we understand him today, began over 3,000 years ago in ancient Persia, where a revolutionary prophet named Zoroaster introduced the world to something terrifying: the first personification of pure evil. This Persian god of destruction would eventually infiltrate Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, becoming the most feared entity in human religious history. But how did an ancient Iranian deity transform into the Satan we know today? The answer will completely change how you understand the devil. Most people believe Satan originated in the Bible, but that's not true. The Hebrew word Satan originally meant nothing more than adversary or opponent. In the oldest books of the Hebrew Bible, there's no cosmic embodiment of evil, no fallen angel, no ruler of hell. Instead, evil was simply considered part of God's creation, sometimes even coming directly from God himself. The transformation of this simple Hebrew word into the personification of ultimate evil required outside influence. And that influence came from the ancient Persian Empire through a religion called Zoroastrianism. Today, we're going to uncover the shocking truth about how Persian religious concepts fundamentally altered Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. We'll explore how a Persian god named Angra Mainyu, also known as Ahriman, became the template for Satan. We'll examine how Jewish exile in Babylon exposed Hebrew scholars to Persian dualistic theology, forever changing how they understood good and evil. And we'll trace the evolution of Satan from a Persian destructive spirit to the devil of modern Abrahamic religions. This isn't just ancient history. Understanding the Persian origins of Satan reveals how religious ideas spread and transform across cultures. It shows how the monotheistic religions we know today were profoundly shaped by Persian thought. By the end of this series, you'll see that the devil isn't just a Jewish or Christian concept, but a Persian import that revolutionized how billions of people understand evil itself. Let's begin with the man who changed everything, Zoroaster, the Iranian prophet whose revolutionary ideas about good and evil would echo through millennia of human religious thought. Zoroaster lived in ancient Iran during what most scholars believe was the second millennium before the Common Era, though some place him as late as the 6th century. He wasn't just another religious teacher. Zoroaster was a radical reformer who challenged the polytheistic religion of his time and introduced concepts that would fundamentally alter human understanding of divinity, morality, and cosmic order. His original name was Zarathustra Spitama, but history remembers him as Zoroaster, the founder of Zoroastrianism. The world Zoroaster inhabited was dominated by Indo-Iranian polytheism, where multiple gods controlled different aspects of existence. These deities weren't necessarily good or evil in any absolute sense. They simply were, governing natural forces and human affairs with little regard for moral categories. But Zoroaster proposed something revolutionary. The universe was engaged in a cosmic battle between absolute good and absolute evil, with humanity caught in the middle. According to Zoroastrian theology, at the beginning of time, there existed two primordial spirits. The first was Angra Mainyu, the Holy Spirit, representing all that was good, creative, and life-giving. The second was Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit, embodying everything evil, chaotic, and death-dealing. These weren't simply opposing forces within a single deity. They were separate, conscious entities locked in eternal conflict. Angra Mainyu, whose name literally means destructive spirit in the ancient Avestan language, became the world's first personification of pure evil. Unlike the morally ambiguous gods of other ancient religions, Angra Mainyu was irredeemably malevolent. His essential nature was expressed through his principal epithet, Druj, meaning the lie. This wasn't just deception in the human sense. Druj represented the fundamental opposition to truth, order, and divine will. The revolutionary aspect of Zoroaster's teaching wasn't just that evil existed, but that it had agency. Angra Mainyu wasn't merely the absence of good or a necessary balance to cosmic order. He was an active, intelligent force working to corrupt and destroy everything good in creation. This concept was unprecedented in ancient religion and would prove incredibly influential on later religious traditions. Zoroaster taught that Angra Mainyu created his own counter-creation to oppose the good world made by Ahura Mazda, the wise lord who was the supreme deity of Zoroastrianism. To aid him in attacking the light, Angra Mainyu created a horde of demons embodying envy, wrath, greed, and similar destructive qualities. These weren't just metaphorical representations of human failings. They were actual spiritual beings with the power to influence human behavior and corrupt divine creation. The theological sophistication of this system was remarkable for its time. Zoroastrianism presented a universe where every human action had cosmic significance. People weren't just living their individual lives. They were choosing sides in an ultimate battle between good and evil. Every good thought, word, and deed strengthened the forces of light. Every evil action empowered Angra Mainyu and his demonic legions. This dualistic framework would prove incredibly influential, but it also created theological problems that different Zoroastrian schools would struggle to resolve. If Ahura Mazda was truly supreme and all-powerful, how could Angra Mainyu exist as an opposing force? Some Zoroastrians developed a doctrine called Zoroastrianism that attempted to solve this dilemma by positing an even more primordial deity. In Zoroastrian theology, both Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu were twins born from Zurvan, the god of infinite time and space. This creation myth provided a compelling narrative that would echo through later religious traditions. According to Zurvanite sources, Zurvan existed alone but desired offspring who would create heaven and hell and everything in between. Zurvan sacrificed for 1,000 years to achieve this goal. Toward the end of this period, Zurvan began to doubt the efficacy of his sacrifice. In that moment of doubt, two beings were conceived, Ahura Mazda from the sacrifice itself and Angra Mainyu from the doubt. This mythology of twin brotherhood born from a transcendent deity would later influence how other religions understood the relationship between good and evil. The Zurvanite interpretation made both good and evil ultimately subject to fate and time, represented by Zurvan. This resolved the theological tension of how an all-powerful good God could permit the existence of an opposing evil force. Both were part of a larger cosmic plan unfolding according to divine decree. These Persian concepts were sophisticated, philosophically complex, and unlike anything that had existed in previous religious thought. The idea that evil had personality, agency, and organized opposition to divine will was revolutionary. But perhaps even more revolutionary was what this meant for human beings. In Zoroastrian thought, humans weren't passive recipients of divine favor or victims of arbitrary godly whims. They were active participants in cosmic warfare. Each person had the freedom and responsibility to choose between good and evil, light and darkness, truth and falsehood. This emphasis on individual moral choice and its cosmic consequences would prove incredibly influential on later religious developments. The Zoroastrian understanding of Angra Mainyu also included sophisticated ideas about his ultimate fate. Unlike many later conceptions of Satan, Angra Mainyu wasn't destined to rule in hell forever. Zoroastrian eschatology taught that the forces of good would ultimately triumph. After a final cosmic battle, Angra Mainyu would be defeated and rendered powerless. This wasn't just a victory for good. It was the complete elimination of evil from existence. This eschatological vision included concepts that would later become central to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. A final judgment, resurrection of the dead, punishment for the wicked, and eternal reward for the righteous. But in Zoroastrianism, these ideas were intimately connected to the cosmic struggle between Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu. The Persian Empire that emerged from this religious context would become the largest empire the world had yet seen, stretching from India to Greece and encompassing numerous peoples and cultures. When Cyrus the Great established the Achaemenid Persian Empire around 550 BCE, Zoroastrianism became the state religion of a vast multicultural realm. This political success ensured that Zoroastrian ideas would encounter and influence other religious traditions. Among the peoples who came under Persian rule were the Jews, and this encounter would prove historically momentous. The Jewish experience of exile, captivity, and eventual restoration under Persian patronage created the perfect conditions for religious syncretism. Persian concepts of cosmic dualism, divine judgment, and the personification of evil would profoundly influence Jewish theology during this crucial period. But to understand how Angra Mainyu became Satan, we need to examine the specific historical circumstances that brought Jewish religious thinkers into sustained contact with Persian theological concepts. The story begins with one of the most traumatic events in ancient Jewish history: the destruction of Jerusalem and the Babylonian exile. This catastrophe wouldn't just reshape Jewish political life, it would fundamentally alter Jewish understanding of God, evil, and cosmic order. The transformation wasn't immediate or simple. It involved complex processes of cultural exchange, theological reflection, and religious innovation. Persian ideas about Angra Mainyu didn't simply replace Jewish concepts of adversity and opposition. Instead, they merged with existing Hebrew traditions to create something new: the figure of Satan as the personification of evil and opposition to God. This fusion of Persian and Hebrew religious concepts would prove to be one of the most significant developments in human religious history. The Satan that emerged from this cultural encounter would go on to influence Christianity and Islam, becoming one of the most recognizable and feared figures in world religion. But that Satan began as Angra Mainyu, the Persian god of evil, destruction, and lies. The Jewish encounter with Persian dualism began not in a temple or through peaceful theological exchange, but in the ashes of their greatest catastrophe. In 587 BCE, the Babylonian Empire, under Nebuchadnezzar II, destroyed Jerusalem, demolished Solomon's temple, and dragged thousands of Jews into exile. This wasn't just military conquest, it was the shattering of everything the Jewish people understood about their relationship with God. For centuries, Jewish theology had been built on a simple premise: Yahweh was their protector, Jerusalem was his city, and the temple was his dwelling place. The destruction of all three created a theological crisis that demanded new explanations. How could an all-powerful God allow his own temple to be destroyed? How could his chosen people be defeated and exiled? The traditional answers weren't sufficient anymore. The exiled Jews found themselves in Babylon, but their theological transformation wouldn't come from Babylonian religion. It would come from the Persians who conquered Babylon in 539 BCE. When Cyrus the Great established the Persian Empire and made Zoroastrianism the state religion, the Jewish exiles suddenly found themselves exposed to a completely different way of understanding good and evil. The timing couldn't have been more crucial. The Jews were already questioning their traditional theological framework. The destruction of Jerusalem had shaken their understanding of divine justice and protection. Into this theological vacuum came Persian ideas about cosmic dualism and the personification of evil. These concepts didn't just fill gaps in Jewish thought, they revolutionized it. Before the exile, Hebrew scripture contained no figure comparable to the Persian Angra Mainyu. The Hebrew Bible's oldest books show a markedly different conception of evil. In the book of Samuel, when God decides to punish King Saul, he sends an evil spirit from the Lord to torment him. This wasn't a rebellious demon acting against God's will. It was God's own agent carrying out divine judgment. Similarly, in the book of Isaiah, God declares, "I form light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil." I, the Lord, do all these things. This wasn't the statement of a deity locked in cosmic battle with an opposing force of evil. This was a God who claimed responsibility for both good and evil as part of his sovereign control over creation. The earliest mention of a Satan in Hebrew scripture appears in the book of Numbers, but this figure bears no resemblance to the Satan of later tradition. When Balaam rides his donkey toward Moab, the angel of the Lord stood in the road as his Satan, meaning his adversary or opponent. This wasn't a cosmic embodiment of evil. It was simply God's angel acting as an obstacle to prevent Balaam from proceeding. Even in the book of Job, often cited as evidence for an early Jewish Satan, the figure called Ha-Satan is clearly a member of God's heavenly court. When the sons of God present themselves before the Lord, there comes Satan among them. He's not a rebellious fallen angel. He's performing his appointed role as a kind of divine prosecutor, testing human faithfulness with God's explicit permission. This pre-exilic understanding of evil and opposition was about to undergo radical transformation. The Persian concept of Angra Mainyu as an independent, intelligent force of evil would merge with the Hebrew idea of Ha-Satan to create something entirely new. But this merger simply wasn't theological borrowing. It was a creative response to the crisis of exile and the need to understand why God's people could suffer such devastating defeat. The Persian influence began subtly. Jewish scholars and religious leaders living in the Persian Empire encountered Zoroastrian ideas about cosmic dualism in official contexts, cultural exchanges, and daily life. The Persian administrative system brought Jews into contact with Zoroastrian priests and concepts. Persian religious festivals, legal procedures, and cultural practices all reflected dualistic thinking about the cosmic battle between good and evil. More importantly, Persian theological concepts offered Jewish thinkers a way to resolve the theological crisis created by the exile. If evil had its own independent existence as an opposing force to God, then Jewish suffering wasn't evidence of God's weakness or abandonment. It was proof that evil forces were actively working against God's purposes. The destruction of Jerusalem wasn't divine punishment. It was the temporary victory of cosmic evil over divine good. This reframing was psychologically and theologically powerful. Instead of seeing themselves as abandoned by God or justly punished for, could understand their sins, Jews their suffering as part of a larger cosmic drama. They weren't victims of divine displeasure. They were participants in an ultimate battle between good and evil, light and darkness, truth and falsehood. The Persian concept of individual moral choice also resonated with Jewish thinkers. Zoroastrianism taught that every person had the freedom and responsibility to choose between Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu. This emphasis on individual moral agency aligned with developing Jewish ideas about personal righteousness and divine judgment. Persian eschatology provided another crucial element. The Zoroastrian teaching that Angra Mainyu would ultimately be defeated offered hope for final vindication. Jewish suffering wasn't meaningless or eternal. It was part of a cosmic process that would culminate in the triumph of good over evil and the restoration of divine justice. These Persian concepts began appearing in Jewish literature, written during and after the exile. The Book of Chronicles, written during the Persian period, shows clear influence from Persian administrative practices and religious concepts. The books of Ezra and Nehemiah, which describe the return from exile under Persian patronage, reflect Persian ideas about divine favour and opposition. But the most dramatic evidence of Persian influence appears in the apocalyptic literature that the Sekhan emerged during Temple period. Books like First Elise and the Testament Enoch, Jub of the 12 Patriarchs, show clear Persian influence in their depictions of cosmic dualism, organised hierarchies of demons, and the ultimate fate of evil. In First Enoch, written sometime between the 3rd and 1st centuries BCE, Satan appears as the leader of the fallen angels who corrupted humanity. This Satan bears striking resemblance to Angra Mainyu in his role as the organizer of evil forces opposed to God. Like the Persian destructive spirit, this Satan isn't just the absence of good. He's an active, intelligent force working to corrupt and destroy divine creation. The book describes how Satan and his demonic allies taught humans forbidden knowledge, introduced violence and sexual corruption, and led humanity away from divine law. This narrative framework mirrors Zoroastrian teachings about how Angra Mainyu corrupts the good creation through deception and the introduction of evil into the world. The transformation wasn't complete overnight. Jewish theological development during the Persian and Hellenistic periods involved complex processes of interpretation, debate, and innovation. Different Jewish communities developed varying understandings of Satan's nature and role. Some emphasized his subordination to God, while others portrayed him as a more independent force of opposition. But the fundamental shift had occurred. The simple Hebrew concept of adversary had been transformed through Persian influence into something approaching the cosmic personification of evil. This transformed Satan would provide the foundation for Christian and Islamic developments of the devil figure. The Persian influence extended beyond just the character of Satan to encompass broader theological concepts. Ideas about angels and demons, heaven and hell, resurrection and final judgment all show clear Persian influence in post-exilic Jewish literature. These concepts weren't simply borrowed wholesale. They were adapted, modified, and integrated with existing Jewish traditions to create new synthetic theologies. The process reveals how religious ideas spread and transform across cultural boundaries. Persian concepts didn't replace Jewish beliefs. Instead, they merged with Hebrew traditions to create new understandings that preserved Jewish identity while incorporating foreign insights. This creative synthesis would prove incredibly influential on the development of Christianity and Islam. The Jewish experience under Persian rule created the perfect conditions for this religious syncretism. The Persians were generally tolerant rulers who allowed subject peoples to maintain their religious practices while exposing them to Persian administrative, legal, and cultural concepts. This tolerance, combined with the theological crisis created by the exile, made Jewish thinkers particularly receptive to Persian ideas that could help resolve their religious questions. The return from Babylonian exile under Persian patronage marked a watershed moment in religious history. When Cyrus the Great issued his famous decree allowing the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple, he wasn't just making a political gesture. He was facilitating one of the most significant religious transformations in human history. The Jews who returned to Jerusalem carried with them Persian theological concepts that would forever alter their understanding of evil, divine justice, and cosmic order. The rebuilding of the Second Temple created new opportunities for Persian religious influence to penetrate Jewish practice and belief. Persian administrators oversaw the reconstruction project. Persian architectural concepts influenced the temple's design. Persian legal and religious practices shaped the restored Jewish community. This wasn't cultural imperialism, it was voluntary adoption of foreign concepts that Jewish leaders found theologically useful and practically effective. The books of Ezra and Nehemiah, written during this period, show clear evidence of Persian influence on Jewish religious thought. Ezra, described as both a priest and a scribe skilled in the law of Moses, had lived his entire life under Persian rule. His understanding of Jewish law and practice was inevitably shaped by Persian administrative and religious concepts. When he led the religious reforms that established Second Temple Judaism, he incorporated Persian ideas about ritual purity, divine judgment, and cosmic order. Nehemiah's memoir reveals similar Persian influence. As cupbearer to the Persian king and later governor of Judah, Nehemiah operated within Persian administrative and cultural frameworks. His approach to rebuilding Jerusalem's walls and reforming Jewish society reflected Persian concepts of divine favor, organized opposition, and the cosmic battle between order and chaos. But perhaps the most significant development was the emergence of organized Jewish demonology during this period. Pre-exilic Hebrew scripture contained virtually no developed hierarchy of evil spirits. The few demonic references that exist are either foreign gods rejected by monotheistic theology or vague personifications of natural disasters and diseases. The Persian period changed this dramatically. Jewish literature from the Second Temple period reveals an elaborate demonology clearly influenced by Zoroastrian concepts. The Testament of Solomon, written sometime between the 1st and 3rd centuries of the Common Era, describes detailed hierarchies of demons with specific names, functions, and methods of operation. These demons aren't just metaphorical representations of human failings. They are actual spiritual beings with the power to possess humans, cause diseases, and corrupt divine creation. The Book of Jubilees, composed during the 2nd century before the Common Era, presents an even more developed demonology. It describes how evil spirits were allowed to remain on earth after the flood to serve as agents of Mastama, a derives from Persian concepts figure who clearly have organized evil opposition to divine will. Mastama isn't just another name for Satan. He represents the Persian idea that evil requires organization, hierarchy, and systematic opposition to good. First Enoch provides perhaps the most dramatic evidence of Persian influence on Jewish demonology. This apocalyptic work, composed over several centuries during the Persian and Hellenistic periods, presents a comprehensive mythology of fallen angels, led by figures whose characteristics closely mirror Angra Mainyu and his demonic hierarchy. The Watchers, as these fallen angels are called, teach humans forbidden knowledge, corrupt divine creation, and organize systematic opposition to God's will. The transformation of Satan's character during this period reflects broader changes in Jewish theological thinking. The simple adversary or prosecutor of earlier Hebrew scripture became the prince of demons, the tempter of humanity, and the cosmic opponent of divine will. This wasn't just terminological evolution. It represented a fundamental shift in how Jews understood the nature and origin of evil. Persian influence extended beyond demonology to encompass Jewish concepts of afterlife and divine judgment. Pre-exilic Hebrew scripture contains virtually no developed theology of life after death. The dead went to Sheol, a shadowy underworld where all souls, good and evil alike, experienced a diminished form of existence. There was no resurrection, no final judgment, no eternal reward or punishment based on moral behavior. Persian Zoroastrianism offered a dramatically different vision. The dead would be resurrected for final judgment. The righteous would receive eternal reward in paradise. The wicked would suffer eternal punishment in hell. Most importantly, this final judgment would occur after a cosmic battle between good and evil that would definitively establish divine justice throughout creation. These Persian concepts began appearing in Jewish literature during the Second Temple period. The Book of Daniel, composed during the 2nd century before the Common Era, contains the Hebrew Bible's clearest reference to resurrection and final judgment. Daniel's vision of the end times includes the defeat of evil kingdoms, the resurrection of the dead, and eternal punishment for the wicked. These concepts show clear Persian influence adapted to Jewish monotheistic theology. The Pharisees, one of the major Jewish religious movements during the Second Temple period, adopted Persian-influenced concepts of resurrection, final judgment, and organized demonology. Their debates with the Sadducees, who rejected these innovations as foreign corruptions of authentic Judaism, reveal the controversial nature of Persian theological influence. The Sadducees maintained traditional Hebrew concepts of death and divine justice. The Pharisees embraced Persian-influenced innovations that would eventually become central to both Christianity and Islam. The development of Jewish apocalyptic literature during this period shows perhaps the clearest evidence of Persian influence. Apocalyptic works like Daniel, 1st Enoch, and 4th Ezra present elaborate visions of cosmic warfare between good and evil, the final defeat of Satan and his demonic armies, and the establishment of divine kingdom on earth. These themes directly parallel Zoroastrian eschatology, adapted to Jewish monotheistic framework. The Persian influence wasn't simply theological borrowing. Jewish writers creatively adapted Persian concepts to address specifically Jewish concerns about covenant, election, and divine justice. The cosmic battle between good and evil became a framework for understanding Jewish suffering and ultimate vindication. The final judgment became the moment when God's justice would be definitively established and his people vindicated. Persian concepts of individual moral choice also influenced Jewish ethical thinking during this period. Zoroastrianism taught that every person had the freedom and responsibility to choose between good and evil. This emphasis on individual moral agency resonated with Jewish concepts of covenant responsibility, but added new dimensions of cosmic significance. Human moral choices weren't just matters of social order or divine favor. They were participation in ultimate cosmic drama. The influence extended to Jewish concepts of prophecy and divine revelation. Persian Zoroastrianism included sophisticated ideas about progressive revelation, with different prophets receiving portions of divine truth appropriate to their historical circumstances. This concept influenced Jewish understanding of how divine revelation unfolded through history and how contemporary religious insights related to ancient scriptural traditions. Jewish mystical literature from this period also shows clear Persian influence. The Hekkalot texts, which describe mystical journeys through heavenly palaces, reflect Persian concepts of spiritual ascent through organized hierarchies of angels and demons. The Tree of Life imagery that became central to Jewish mysticism parallels Zoroastrian concepts of the cosmic tree that connects earth to heaven and provides access to divine wisdom. The transformation wasn't uniform across all Jewish communities. Jews living in different parts of the Persian Empire encountered varying degrees of Zoroastrian influence. Communities in Mesopotamia, where Persian administrative presence was strongest, show more dramatic theological innovations than those in more remote regions. Urban Jews involved in Persian administration and commerce were more exposed to Zoroastrian concepts than rural agricultural communities. The process also involved selective adaptation rather than wholesale borrowing. Jewish theologians didn't simply adopt Persian concepts unchanged. They modified, reinterpreted, and integrated foreign ideas with existing Hebrew traditions to create new synthetic theologies that preserved Jewish identity while incorporating valuable insights from Persian religious thought. This creative synthesis created the theological foundation for both Christianity and Islam. The Satan that emerged from Persian-influenced Jewish theology provided the model for Christian and Islamic concepts of the devil. Persian ideas about resurrection, final judgment, and cosmic warfare between good and evil became central to both later religions. The angel and demon hierarchies developed during the Second Temple period influenced Christian and Islamic angelology and demonology. The Persian influence on Jewish thought during this period represents one of the most successful examples of religious syncretism in human history. foreign theological concepts were successfully integrated with existing religious traditions to create new understandings that preserved cultural identity while expanding spiritual insight. The resulting synthesis proved incredibly durable and influential, shaping the development of the world's major monotheistic religions. The transformation of Angra Mainyu into Satan, through this process of religious syncretism, reveals how theological concepts spread across cultural boundaries and adapt to new Persian Go religious contexts. Thed of evil did in both traditions while and Hebrew ideas merged to create something new that drew from its simply replaced Jewish concepts of adversity and opposition. Instead, Persian transcending the limitations of either alone. This historical process challenges common assumptions about religious originality and cultural purity. The Satan that became central to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam wasn't a figure that purely Hebrew creation. It was a synthetic emerged from the creative encounter between Persian and Jewish religious thought during a crucial period of cultural contact and theological innovation. The Persian origins of Satan also reveal how religious ideas develop through complex processes of cultural exchange, theological reflection, and creative adaptation. The devil didn't emerge fully formed from a single religious tradition. Instead, he developed through centuries of cross-cultural encounter, theological debate, and religious innovation that gradually transformed Persian concepts of cosmic evil into the Satan of Abrahamic monotheism. Understanding these Persian origins doesn't diminish the significance of Satan in later religious traditions. Instead, it reveals how human religious insight develops through dialogue, exchange, and creative synthesis between different cultural and theological traditions. The Satan that emerged from Persian-influenced Jewish theology proved remarkably durable and influential, precisely because he represented the best insights of multiple religious traditions, creatively combined into new synthetic understanding. The story of how Angra Mainyu became Satan demonstrates that religious truth often emerges not from isolated revelation, but from the creative encounter between different spiritual traditions. The Persian contribution to Jewish, Christian, and Islamic concepts of evil reveals how divine insight can work through processes of cultural exchange and theological innovation to create new understandings that transcend the limitations of any single religious tradition. But the Persian influence didn't stop with Jewish theology. When Christianity emerged in the first century of the Common Era, it inherited these Persian-influenced Jewish concepts and developed them even further. The early Christian understanding of Satan drew heavily from the synthetic theology that had emerged during the Second Temple period. But Christian theologians would push these ideas in directions that would have surprised both Persian Zoroastrians and Second Temple Jews. The New Testament reflects this complex theological inheritance. When Jesus speaks of Satan in the Gospels, he's drawing on centuries of Persian-influenced Jewish development. The Satan who tempts Jesus in the wilderness bears striking resemblance to Angra Mainyu in his role as the cosmic opponent of divine will. Like the Persian destructive spirit, this Satan doesn't simply represent human weakness or moral failure. He's an active, intelligent force working to corrupt and destroy God's purposes in the world. The Gospel of Matthew presents Satan offering Jesus all the kingdoms of the world if he will worship him. This scene reflects Persian concepts of cosmic dualism, where evil forces have genuine power and authority in the material world. The temptation isn't just a test of Jesus' moral character, it's a confrontation between cosmic forces of good and evil that will determine the fate of creation itself. Paul's letters reveal even more sophisticated development of Persian-influenced concepts. When Paul describes spiritual warfare against principalities and powers in heavenly places, he's drawing on Persian ideas about organized hierarchies of evil spirits opposed to divine will. The armor of God that Paul describes isn't just metaphorical protection against human weakness. It's equipment for cosmic battle against supernatural forces of evil. The Book of Revelation represents perhaps the most dramatic Christian development of Persian theological concepts. John's apocalyptic vision includes a cosmic war between good and evil, the binding of Satan, and his ultimate defeat and punishment in a lake of fire. These themes directly parallel Zoroastrian eschatology, but adapt them to specifically Christian concerns about Jesus' role in defeating evil and establishing divine kingdom on earth. The development of Christian demonology during the patristic period shows continued Persian influence. Church fathers like Origen and John Chrysostom described elaborate hierarchies of demons with specific functions and methods of operation. These weren't just personifications of human vices, they were actual spiritual beings organized under Satan's leadership to oppose God's purposes in systematic fashion. Christian concepts of hell also reflect Persian influence, filtered through Jewish theological development. The lake of fire described in Revelation parallels Zoroastrian concepts of molten metal used to purify the world and punish the wicked. The eternal torment of the damned reflects Persian ideas about cosmic justice that demands punishment proportionate to cosmic crimes against divine order. The transformation of Satan's character in Christian theology added new dimensions not present in either Persian or Jewish traditions. The identification of Satan with the serpent in Genesis created a narrative of cosmic rebellion that explained the origin of evil in creation. The concept of Satan as a fallen angel who had once been among the highest of God's creatures added tragic dimensions to the cosmic conflict between good and evil. Christian theology also developed the idea that Satan's defeat was already accomplished through Jesus' death and resurrection. This wasn't simply future hope, as in Persian eschatology or Jewish apocalypticism. It was present reality that believers could experience through faith. Satan remained active and dangerous, but his ultimate power was already broken through Christ's victory over death and sin. This present but not yet understanding of Satan's defeat created distinctive Christian approaches to spiritual warfare and demonology. Believers weren't just waiting for future cosmic battle between good and evil. They were participating in ongoing conflict where Christ's victory was already certain but not yet fully realized. This theological framework influenced Christian practices of exorcism, spiritual discipline, and evangelistic mission. The spread of Christianity throughout the Roman Empire carried these Persian-influenced concepts of Satan and cosmic dualism to new cultural contexts. Greek philosophical traditions provided new vocabulary and conceptual frameworks for understanding the nature of evil and its relationship to divine goodness. Roman legal concepts influenced Christian understanding of Satan's accusations against humanity and Christ's role as advocate and redeemer. The encounter between Christian theology and Greek philosophy created new synthetic understandings of Satan's nature and function. Church fathers, like Augustine, drew on Platonic concepts of evil as privation or absence of good to explain how Satan could exist within God's sovereign creation without compromising divine omnipotence. These philosophical developments added intellectual sophistication to Persian-influenced concepts of cosmic dualism. Medieval Christian theology further developed Persian-influenced concepts of Satan through scholastic philosophical methods. Thomas Aquinas' systematic theology included detailed analysis of demonic nature, function, and limitations that drew on centuries of Persian-influenced development while adding new philosophical rigor and precision. The result was a comprehensive demonology that influenced Christian understanding of evil for centuries. The development of Christian art and literature during the medieval period gave visual and narrative form to Persian-influenced concepts of Satan and cosmic warfare. Dante's Divine Comedy presented detailed geography of hell and systematic punishment of different categories of sin that reflected centuries of theological development rooted ultimately in Persian dualistic concepts. Medieval mystery plays and passion narratives brought these theological concepts into popular culture and devotional practice. The Protestant Reformation brought new attention to biblical texts and early Christian sources, but it didn't eliminate Persian influence on Christian concepts. Reformers like Martin Luther and John Calvin of Satan maintained traditional Christian demonology while emphasizing different aspects of Satan's role in human sinfulness and divine judgment. Lutheran and Reformed theological traditions continue to reflect Persian-influenced understanding of cosmic conflict between good and evil. The influence extended beyond Western Christianity to Eastern Orthodox and other Christian traditions. Byzantine theology developed its own distinctive approaches to understanding Satan's nature and function, but these remained rooted in Persian-influenced concepts inherited from Second Temple Judaism and early Christian development. Syriac, Coptic, and Armenian Christian traditions all show evidence of Persian theological influence in their demonological teachings. Islamic theology represents another major development of Persian-influenced concepts of cosmic evil. The Quranic figure of Iblis shows clear relationship to both Persian Angra Mainyu and Jewish Christian Satan. But Islamic theological development created distinctive approaches to understanding the nature and function of cosmic evil within monotheistic framework. The Quranic account of Iblis's refusal to prostrate before Adam parallels the Christian narrative of Satan's rebellion, but it adds unique elements that reflect specifically Islamic concerns about divine sovereignty and human responsibility. Iblis becomes the tempter of humanity, not through cosmic rebellion against divine authority, but through prideful refusal to acknowledge the honor that God bestowed on human creation. Islamic demonology developed sophisticated understanding of Iblis's role as leader of jinn and shayateen, who work to lead humans away from divine guidance. These concepts show clear Persian influence in their emphasis on organized opposition to divine will, but they're adapted to Islamic theological framework that maintains absolute divine sovereignty while preserving human moral responsibility. The development of Islamic mysticism added new dimensions to Persian-influenced concepts of spiritual warfare against evil. Sufi teachings about purification of the soul and resistance to nafs, lower self, drew on Persian dualistic concepts, while adapting them to Islamic understanding of divine unity and human spiritual potential. The result was sophisticated psychology of spiritual development that recognized real opposition from evil forces while maintaining Islamic theological principles. Islamic philosophical traditions also engaged with Persian-influenced concepts of evil through encounter with Greek philosophical methods. Islamic philosophers like Al-Ghazali and Ibn Sina developed systematic approaches to understanding the nature of evil and its relationship to divine attributes that built on centuries of Persian-influenced theological development, while adding new philosophical sophistication. The influence of Persian concepts of cosmic evil extended beyond theological development to shape Islamic law and social practice. Islamic legal traditions developed detailed provisions for dealing with magic, sorcery, and demonic influence that reflected Persian-influenced understanding of supernatural evil forces. These legal developments had practical consequences for Islamic societies throughout history. The spread of Islam across diverse cultural contexts carried Persian-influenced concepts of Iblis and cosmic evil to new regions and peoples. Indonesian, West African, and Central Asian Islamic traditions all developed distinctive approaches to understanding evil and spiritual warfare that combined Persian-influenced theological concepts with local cultural traditions and practices. The historical development reveals remarkable consistency in how Persian concepts of cosmic evil adapted to different monotheistic frameworks. Whether in Jewish, the basic pattern Christian, or Islamic contexts remain similar. Evil has personality, agency, and organized opposition to divine will. Human beings are caught in cosmic conflict between good and evil. Individual moral choices have cosmic significance, and ultimate victory of good over evil is assured through divine intervention. This consistency suggests that Persian theological insights nature and addressed fundamental human concerns about the origin of evil, that cultural and transcend specific religious contexts. The Persian contribution to monotheistic understanding of evil wasn't simply historical accident or cultural imperialism. It represented genuine theological insight that proved valuable and durable across diverse religious traditions. The Persian origins of Satan also reveal how religious concepts develop through complex processes of cultural transmission, theological reflection, and creative adaptation. The Angra Mainyu of ancient Zoroastrianism didn't simply become the Satan of later monotheistic traditions through direct borrowing or mechanical translation. Instead, Persian concepts underwent centuries of development, modification, and creative synthesis with other theological traditions. Understanding these Persian origins doesn't diminish the significance of Satan in Jewish, Christian, or Islamic traditions. Instead, it reveals how divine revelation and human religious insight often work through processes of cultural encounter and theological dialogue. The Persian contribution to monotheistic concepts of evil demonstrates that religious truth can emerge through creative synthesis between different spiritual traditions rather than isolated revelation within single cultural contexts. The story of how Angra Mainyu became Satan challenges common assumptions about religious originality and cultural purity. The devil, who became central to billions of people's understanding of evil, wasn't the product of single religious tradition developing in isolation. Instead, he emerged through complex processes of cultural exchange, theological innovation, and creative adaptation that spanned centuries and multiple civilizations. The Persian influence on concepts of Satan and cosmic evil also reveals how theological ideas spread across cultural boundaries and adapt to new religious contexts. Persian concepts didn't simply replace existing religious traditions. Instead, they merged with local theological frameworks to create new synthetic understandings that preserved cultural identity while incorporating valuable insights from foreign religious thought. This pattern of religious syncretism and theological development continues to shape contemporary understanding of evil and spiritual warfare. Modern Jewish, Christian, and Islamic approaches to understanding Satan and demonic influence still reflect centuries of Persian-influenced development, even when contemporary believers are unaware of these historical origins. The Persian contribution to monotheistic concepts of evil represents one of the most successful examples of cross-cultural theological influence in human history. Persian insights about the nature of cosmic evil proved so valuable and durable that they became integral to multiple religious traditions and continue to shape billions of people's understanding of the fundamental conflict between good and evil that defines human moral existence. The Persian theological revolution that gave birth to Satan wasn't confined to abstract religious debates in ancient temples. It fundamentally transformed how ordinary people understood their daily struggles with temptation, suffering, and moral choice. When Persian concepts of cosmic evil merged with Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions, they created practical frameworks for spiritual warfare that billions of people still use today. Consider how differently you might approach personal struggles if you believed evil was simply the absence of good versus believing it was an intelligent, organized force, actively working against your spiritual well-being. Persian theology introduced the revolutionary idea that human moral failures weren't just individual weaknesses or random misfortunes. They were battles in a cosmic war where supernatural forces of evil deployed sophisticated strategies to corrupt and destroy human souls. This shift had profound psychological implications. Pre-Persian Jewish theology often attributed suffering and moral failure directly to divine punishment or human weakness. If you experienced persistent temptation or repeated moral failures, it suggested either that God was testing you or that you lacked sufficient moral strength. This framework could lead to despair, self-condemnation, or religious doubt. Persian-influenced theology offered a radically different interpretation. Persistent weren't evidenced moral struggle, adaptation, andonment, or personal of divine Aban inadequacy. They were proof that you were important enough for cosmic forces of evil to target specifically. Your struggles weren't signs of spiritual failure, they were evidence of spiritual significance. This reframing proved psychologically powerful across cultures and centuries. When early Christians faced persecution under Roman rule, they understood their suffering not as evidence that their faith was misguided, but as confirmation that they were engaged in cosmic warfare against Satan's kingdom. When medieval Muslims encountered opposition while spreading Islamic teachings, they interpreted resistance not as human disagreement, but as demonic opposition to divine truth. The practical implications extended beyond personal psychology to shape entire civilizations' approaches to law, education, medicine, and social organization. If evil had personality and intelligence, then societies needed sophisticated methods for detecting and combating supernatural corruption. This led to development of exorcism rituals, spiritual discernment practices, and elaborate legal frameworks for dealing with witchcraft and demonic influence. Medieval European society was profoundly shaped by Persian-influenced concepts of cosmic evil. The widespread belief in Satan's active opposition to Christian civilization influenced everything from architectural design of churches to agricultural practices intended to protect crops from demonic corruption. Legal codes included detailed provisions for prosecuting witchcraft and demonic possession. Educational curricula trained clergy to recognize and combat supernatural evil. The influence wasn't limited to European Christianity. Islamic societies developed their own sophisticated approaches to spiritual warfare based on Persian-influenced concepts of Iblis and demonic hierarchy. Islamic medical traditions included treatments for conditions believed to result from jinn possession or demonic influence. Islamic legal scholars developed detailed jurisprudence for dealing with magic, sorcery, and supernatural corruption. Jewish communities throughout the diaspora maintained Persian-influenced traditions of demonology and spiritual protection. Kabbalistic literature included elaborate systems for understanding and combating evil forces that drew heavily on Persian theological concepts. Jewish folk practices included prayers, amulets, and rituals specifically designed to protect against demonic attack. The Persian influence on concepts of evil also shaped artistic and literary traditions across multiple cultures. Medieval Christian art depicted Satan and his demonic hierarchy in ways that reflected centuries of Persian-influenced theological development. Islamic calligraphy and architectural decoration often included protective elements designed to ward off evil influences, understood through Persian theological frameworks. Literary traditions were equally influenced. Dante's systematic description of hell's geography and the punishment of different categories of sin reflected sophisticated demonology rooted ultimately in Persian concepts of organized cosmic evil. Islamic literary traditions included elaborate descriptions of spiritual warfare and demonic temptation that drew on Persian-influenced theological understanding. The influence extended to music and oral traditions as well. Christian hymns and liturgical music included themes of spiritual warfare against Satan that reflected Persian theological concepts. Islamic devotional practices included recitations specifically designed to provide protection against evil forces, understood through Persian-influenced frameworks. Folk traditions across diverse cultures incorporated Persian-influenced concepts of cosmic evil into everyday practices. Agricultural communities developed planting and harvesting rituals designed to protect crops from demonic corruption. Artisan guilds included prayers and protective practices intended to ward off evil influences on their work. Merchant traditions incorporated spiritual protection against demonic interference with trade and commerce. The Persian contribution to understanding evil wasn't just theological abstraction. It provided practical frameworks for navigating the moral complexities of daily life. When people faced difficult ethical choices, Persian-influenced traditions offered clear categories for understanding the supernatural dimensions of temptation and moral failure. This practical emphasis explains why Persian concepts of evil proved so durable across diverse cultural contexts. They weren't just intellectually satisfying theological explanations. They provided useful tools for spiritual development making that ordinary and moral decision people could apply in their daily lives. The psychological benefits were substantial. Persian-influenced frameworks for understanding evil provided hope for people struggling with persistent moral failures or overwhelming temptations. Instead of viewing these struggles as evidence of personal inadequacy or divine disapproval, people could understand them as participation in cosmic warfare, where ultimate victory was assured. The social benefits were equally significant. Communities that shared Persian-influenced understanding of cosmic evil could work together to combat supernatural threats through collective spiritual practices. This created strong social bonds and shared sense of purpose that transcended individual differences and personal conflicts. The influence on healing traditions was particularly important. Persian concepts of organized demonic hierarchy provided frameworks for understanding mental illness, chronic disease, and persistent suffering that went beyond purely physical explanations. This led to development of healing practices that addressed spiritual as well as physical dimensions of human suffering. Persian-influenced traditions of spiritual warfare also provided frameworks for understanding and addressing social problems. Crime, political corruption, and social conflict could be interpreted not just as human failures, but as manifestations of supernatural evil that required spiritual as well as practical responses. The educational implications were profound. Persian concepts of cosmic evil influenced how children were taught about moral responsibility and spiritual development. Educational practices included training in spiritual discernment, protection against temptation, and participation in cosmic warfare against evil forces. The Persian influence on concepts of divine justice was equally significant. Traditional approaches to understanding suffering and injustice often struggled to reconcile human experience with beliefs about divine goodness and omnipotence. Persian dualistic concepts provided frameworks for understanding how evil could exist and cause genuine harm, while ultimate divine victory remained certain. This theological innovation had profound implications for understanding prayer, worship, and spiritual discipline. If cosmic forces of evil were actively opposing divine purposes, then spiritual practices needed to include specific elements of warfare and protection. This led to development of elaborate traditions of spiritual warfare that combined petition, praise, and active opposition to demonic influence. The Persian contribution to understanding prophecy and divine revelation was equally important. Persian concepts of progressive revelation through different historical periods influenced how monotheistic traditions understood the relationship between ancient scriptures and contemporary spiritual insights. This provided frameworks for theological development that preserved reverence for ancient texts while allowing for new understanding appropriate to changing historical circumstances. The influence on mystical traditions was particularly significant. Persian concepts of cosmic evil provided frameworks for understanding the obstacles and opposition that spiritual seekers encountered during their journey toward divine union. This led to development of sophisticated spiritual psychology that recognized real supernatural opposition while maintaining ultimate confidence in divine victory. Persian-influenced understanding of evil also shaped approaches to evangelism and religious human resistance conversion. If to religious truth reflected not just intellectual disagreement, but demonic opposition, then successful religious outreach required spiritual warfare as well as rational argument. This influenced missionary strategies and conversion practices across multiple religious traditions. The Persian contribution to understanding community and social organization was equally profound. If cosmic forces of evil were actively working to corrupt human societies, then faithful communities needed to organize themselves as spiritual armies engaged in ongoing warfare. This influenced everything from leadership structures to disciplinary practices in religious communities. the influence on political thought was substantial as well. Persian concepts of cosmic warfare between good and evil provided frameworks for understanding the spiritual dimensions of political conflict and social change. This influenced how religious communities to secular understood their relationship authorities and their responsibilities for social justice. The Persian theological revolution that created Satan as we know him today represented far more than historical curiosity or academic interest. It fundamentally transformed how billions determines the ultimate role in cosmic drama, that of people understand the nature of evil, the purpose of suffering, and their destiny of creation itself. The practical implications of this theological transformation continue to shape contemporary religious practice across Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions. Modern believers may not realize that their understanding of spiritual warfare, demonic temptation, and cosmic justice derives ultimately from ancient Persian religious insights. But these concepts remain central to how they navigate moral choices and spiritual challenges. The Persian origins of Satan reveal how religious truth often emerges through complex processes of cultural encounter and theological dialogue, rather than isolated revelation within single traditions. The insights about cosmic evil that proved so valuable and durable across diverse religious contexts weren't the product of one prophet or one culture developing in isolation. They emerged through centuries of creative interaction between different spiritual traditions, seeking to understand fundamental questions about the nature and origin of evil. This historical process challenges contemporary assumptions about religious authenticity and cultural purity. The Satan who became central to monotheistic understanding of evil wasn't a purely Hebrew, Christian, or Islamic creation. He was a synthetic figure who emerged through creative encounter between Persian and Semitic religious traditions during periods of cultural contact and theological innovation. Understanding these Persian origins doesn't diminish the significance of Satan in contemporary religious traditions. Instead, it reveals how divine revelation and human religious insight often work through processes of cultural exchange and theological dialogue that transcend the boundaries of individual religious communities. The Persian contribution to monotheistic concepts of evil demonstrates that religious truth can emerge through creative synthesis between different spiritual traditions. The story of how Angra Mainyu became Satan also illustrates how theological concepts spread across cultural boundaries and adapt to new religious contexts through complex processes of interpretation, modification, and creative application. Persian insights about cosmic evil didn't simply replace existing religious traditions. Instead, they merged with local theological frameworks to create new synthetic understandings that preserved cultural identity while incorporating valuable insights from foreign religious thought. This pattern of religious development continues to shape contemporary understanding of evil and spiritual warfare. Modern approaches to understanding Satan and demonic influence in Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions still reflect centuries of Persian-influenced development, even when contemporary believers are unaware of these historical origins. The Persian influence on concepts of cosmic evil represents one of the most successful and enduring examples of cross-cultural theological exchange in human history. Persian insights about the nature of evil proved so valuable and adaptable that they became integral to multiple religious traditions and continue to influence billions of people's understanding of fundamental moral and spiritual realities. The transformation of Angra Mainyu into Satan reveals how human religious understanding develops through dialogue between different cultural and spiritual traditions, rather than isolated development within single communities. The devil, who became central to monotheistic theology, wasn't the product of pure revelation or cultural isolation. He emerged through complex historical processes of encounter, dialogue, and creative synthesis that spanned centuries and multiple civilizations. This historical perspective provides important insights for contemporary religious dialogue and theological development. The Persian contribution to monotheistic understanding of evil demonstrates that different religious traditions can learn from each other and create new synthetic understandings that preserve the best insights of multiple spiritual frameworks while transcending the limitations of any single tradition. The story of Satan's Persian origins ultimately reveals that religious truth is often discovered through encounter with the other, rather than retreat into isolation. The theological insights that proved most valuable and enduring emerged through creative dialogue between different spiritual traditions rather than pure development within single cultural contexts. The Persian god of evil who became Satan continues to shape how billions of people understand the fundamental conflict between good and evil that defines human moral existence. His transformation from Angra Mainyu to Satan represents one of the most significant religious developments in human history, revealing how theological concepts can transcend their original cultural contexts to become integral elements of diverse religious traditions. But the Persian influence on concepts of evil extended far beyond the figure of Satan himself. Persian theological concepts fundamentally altered how monotheistic religions understood the nature of divine justice, human moral responsibility, and the ultimate destiny of creation. These broader implications of Persian religious thought would prove equally influential on the development of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, creating theological frameworks that continue to shape religious understanding today. The Persian theological revolution that gave birth to Satan as the personification of cosmic evil was just one element of a comprehensive religious worldview that would transform human understanding of divinity, morality, and ultimate reality. The full scope of this Persian influence on monotheistic theology reveals even more profound connections between ancient Zoroastrian concepts and contemporary religious belief than most people realize. Persian concepts of resurrection and final judgment represented perhaps the most revolutionary theological innovation that would reshape monotheistic understanding of death and divine justice. Before Persian influence, most ancient religions offered vague or inconsistent ideas about what happened after death. The Hebrew concept of Sheol described a shadowy underworld, where all souls experienced diminished existence regardless of their moral behavior. Egyptian afterlife concepts focused primarily on pharaohs and nobility. Greek ideas about Hades provided little hope for ordinary people. Zoroastrian theology introduced something unprecedented: the idea that individual moral choices during earthly life would determine eternal destiny after a cosmic resurrection and final judgment. This wasn't just personal survival after death. It was cosmic justice finally implemented throughout creation. Every deed would be weighed, every injustice corrected, every victim vindicated. The Persian concept of resurrection was intimately connected to their understanding of cosmic warfare between Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu. The final battle wouldn't just defeat evil forces, it would restore all of creation to its intended perfect state. The dead would be raised with perfected bodies to participate in this renewed world. The righteous would experience eternal joy, while the wicked faced punishment proportionate to their crimes against divine order. These ideas began appearing in Jewish literature during the Persian period, with dramatic theological implications. The Book of Daniel, composed during the 2nd century before the Common Era, contains the Hebrew Bible's most explicit reference to resurrection. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. This wasn't traditional Hebrew theology. It was Persian-influenced innovation adapted to Jewish monotheistic framework. The Persian influence extended beyond individual resurrection to encompass cosmic renewal of all creation. Zoroastrian eschatology taught that the final victory over evil would transform the entire universe. Mountains would be leveled, valleys filled, and the earth made into a perfect paradise where the resurrected righteous would dwell forever. This vision of cosmic restoration would prove incredibly influential on Jewish, Christian, and Islamic concepts of the world to come. Persian ideas about divine judgment were equally revolutionary. Traditional ancient Near Eastern concepts of justice focused primarily on maintaining social order and royal authority. Persian theology introduced the idea that cosmic justice required perfect moral accountability for every individual action. Nothing would escape divine scrutiny. Every secret would be revealed, every wrong would be corrected. The Persian concept of judgment involves sophisticated ideas about moral categories and proportionate punishment. Different types of evil deserved different consequences. The Zoroastrian vision of hell included various levels of punishment, corresponding to different categories of sin. This systematic approach to divine justice would later influence Jewish apocalyptic literature, Christian concepts of purgatory and hell, and Islamic descriptions of divine judgment. Persian influence on concepts of prayer and worship was equally significant. Zoroastrian religious practice emphasized the cosmic significance of individual devotion. Every prayer was participation in the battle against evil. Every ritual act strengthened the forces of light. Every moment of worship contributed to the ultimate victory of good over evil. These concepts transformed Jewish understanding of religious practice during the Second Temple period. Prayer wasn't just petition for divine favor or thanksgiving for blessings received. It was active participation in cosmic warfare. The synagogue liturgy that developed during this period included elements of praise, petition, and spiritual warfare that reflected Persian theological concepts. Persian concepts of ritual purity also influenced Jewish religious development. Zoroastrian emphasis on the cosmic significance of cleanliness and contamination provided frameworks for understanding ritual laws that went beyond mere social hygiene or cultural distinctiveness. Purity laws became expressions of cosmic order, while impurity represented the intrusion of chaotic evil into divine creation. The Persian influence on Jewish concepts of prophecy was particularly important. Zoroastrian ideas about progressive revelation through different historical periods influenced how Jews understood the relationship between ancient scriptures and contemporary religious insights. This provided frameworks for ongoing theological development that preserved reverence for traditional texts while allowing for new understanding. Persian concepts of divine sovereignty also influenced Jewish theology during this crucial period. Ahura Mazda's cosmic authority over both good and evil spirits provided models for understanding how monotheistic faith could acknowledge the reality of evil forces without compromising divine omnipotence. God remained ultimately while sovereign, even permitting cosmic warfare between supernatural forces of good and evil. The Persian contribution to Jewish concepts of covenant was equally significant. Zoroastrian emphasis on individual moral choice and cosmic consequences influenced how Jews understood their relationship with God. The covenant wasn't just ethnic inheritance or cultural tradition. It was conscious participation in cosmic drama, where human choices had ultimate significance. Persian influence on Jewish concepts of wisdom literature was profound as well. Zoroastrian ideas about the cosmic battle between truth and falsehood influenced how Jewish writers understood the nature of wisdom and foolishness. Wisdom wasn't just practical knowledge for successful living. It was participation in cosmic truth, while foolishness aligned with forces of deception and chaos. The Persian theological revolution also influenced Jewish understanding of history and divine providence. Zoroastrian concepts of cosmic cycles and progressive revelation provided frameworks for understanding how divine purposes unfolded through historical events. This influenced Jewish interpretations of exile, restoration, and ongoing relationship with surrounding nations. Persian concepts of angelic hierarchy profoundly influenced Jewish angelology during the Second Temple period. Pre-exilic Hebrew scripture contained few references to angels beyond occasional mentions of divine messengers. Persian period Jewish literature developed elaborate hierarchies of angels with specific names, functions, and relationships to divine administration. The Book of Daniel introduces named angels like Michael and Gabriel, who function as cosmic warriors and divine messengers. First, Enoch describes complex hierarchies of angels organized into different orders with specific responsibilities for natural phenomena, divine worship, and cosmic warfare. These developments clearly reflect Persian influence on Jewish understanding of spiritual beings. Persian influence extended to Jewish concepts of divine names and attributes as well. Zoroastrian theology included sophisticated understanding of different aspects of divine nature, expressed through various names and epithets. This influenced Jewish development of complex traditions about divine names and their proper usage in prayer and worship. The Persian contribution to Jewish mystical traditions was particularly significant. Zoroastrian concepts of spiritual ascent through various levels of reality influenced Jewish development of mystical practices and literature. The Hekkalot texts describe journeys through heavenly palaces that parallel Persian ideas about spiritual progression toward divine union. Persian influence on Jewish concepts of creation was equally important. Zoroastrian ideas about the cosmic battle between order and chaos influenced Jewish understanding of how divine creation related to ongoing struggles against evil forces. Creation wasn't just past event, but ongoing process of establishing divine order against chaotic opposition. The Persian theological revolution also influenced Jewish understanding of law and ethics. Zoroastrian emphasis on individual moral responsibility and cosmic consequences provided frameworks for understanding how religious law related to ultimate questions of justice and divine judgment. Ethical behavior wasn't just social obligation, but participation in cosmic warfare. Persian concepts of divine mercy and judgment influenced Jewish theological development as well. Zoroastrian ideas about how divine justice balanced punishment and forgiveness provided models for understanding God's relationship with sinful humanity. This influenced Jewish concepts of repentance, atonement, and divine grace. The Persian influence on Jewish concepts of community and religious authority was substantial. Zoroastrian ideas about religious hierarchy and the cosmic significance of priestly functions influenced Jewish development of religious leadership structures. The priesthood wasn't just ritual functionaries, but cosmic warriors maintaining divine order against evil forces. Persian theological concepts also influenced Jewish understanding of scripture and revelation. Zoroastrian ideas about how divine truth was communicated through various prophets and historical periods provided frameworks for understanding the relationship between different biblical texts and their ongoing religious authority. The Persian contribution to Jewish concepts of conversion and religious identity was equally significant. Zoroastrian emphasis on conscious choice between good and evil influenced Jewish understanding of how people could become part of the covenant community. Religious identity wasn't just ethnic inheritance, but conscious participation in cosmic warfare. Persian influence on Jewish concepts of suffering and divine justice was particularly important, given the trauma of exile and ongoing struggles with foreign domination. Zoroastrian frameworks for understanding how cosmic warfare explained temporary victories of evil forces provided hope and meaning for Jewish communities facing persecution and displacement. The Persian theological revolution that influenced Jewish understanding of evil, judgment, and cosmic warfare would prove equally influential on the development of Christianity. When Jesus and his early followers proclaimed the arrival of God's kingdom, they drew heavily on Persian-influenced Jewish concepts that had developed during the Second Temple period. The Christian understanding of Satan as the cosmic opponent of divine purposes reflected centuries of Persian-influenced development within Jewish theology. When Jesus spoke of binding the strong man or casting out demons, he was operating within theological frameworks that traced back ultimately to Persian concepts of organized supernatural evil. Christian concepts of resurrection and final judgment similarly reflected Persian theological influence filtered through Jewish development. The idea that individual moral choices during earthly life would determine eternal destiny wasn't original to Christianity. It was Persian innovation that had already transformed Jewish theology and provided the foundation for Christian eschatological teaching. The Christian emphasis on cosmic warfare between the kingdom of God and the kingdom of Satan drew directly on Persian-influenced Jewish concepts of dualistic conflict. Early Christian literature described ongoing battles between supernatural forces of good and evil that paralleled Zoroastrian mythology while adapting it to specifically Christian concerns about Jesus' role in defeating evil. Christian concepts of divine judgment and eternal punishment reflected Persian theological concepts that had already influenced Jewish apocalyptic literature. The detailed descriptions of hell and eternal torment in Christian sources paralleled Zoroastrian concepts of proportionate punishment for cosmic crimes against divine order. The Christian understanding of prophecy and divine revelation similarly reflected Persian influence on Jewish theological development. Ideased frameworks for understanding how Christian teachings about progressive revelation through different historical periods provide related to Hebrew scriptures and ongoing divine communication. Christian concepts of prayer and worship as participation in cosmic warfare reflected Persian theological concepts that had already transformed Jewish religious practice. The emphasis on spiritual warfare in Christian devotional literature drew on centuries of Persian-influenced development within Jewish spirituality. The Christian understanding of religious authority and community organization also reflected Persian influence on Jewish concepts of priesthood and religious hierarchy. Christian ideas about apostolic authority and ecclesiastical structure drew on Persian-influenced Jewish concepts of religious leadership as cosmic warfare against evil forces. Christian concepts of conversion and religious identity reflected Persian influence on Jewish understanding of covenant community. The Christian emphasis on conscious choice and personal faith drew on Persian-influenced Jewish concepts of individual participation in cosmic warfare between good and evil. The Christian understanding of suffering and persecution as participation in cosmic conflict reflected Persian theological concepts that had already provided meaning for Jewish communities facing oppression. Christian martyrology drew on Persian-influenced frameworks for understanding how temporary victories of evil forces related to ultimate divine victory. The Persian influence on Christianity extended beyond theological concepts to encompass practical aspects of religious life as well. Christian concepts of ritual purity, spiritual discipline, and community organization all reflected Persian theological concepts filtered through Jewish development during the Second Temple period. Christian art and literature also reflected Persian influence on concepts of cosmic warfare and divine judgment. Medieval Christian depictions of heaven and hell drew on centuries of Persian-influenced development that had already shaped Jewish and early Christian art, Christian understanding of afterlife and divine justice. The Persian theological revolution that had already transformed Judaism would prove equally influential on the development of Islam. When Muhammad proclaimed the unity of God and the reality of divine judgment, he drew on Persian-influenced concepts that had already been integrated into Jewish and Christian traditions throughout the Middle East. The Islamic understanding of Iblis as the cosmic opponent of divine purposes reflected Persian concepts of organized supernatural evil that had already influenced Jewish and Christian demonology. The Quranic account of Iblis's refusal to prostrate before Adam paralleled Persian mythology about cosmic rebellion against divine authority. Islamic concepts of resurrection and final judgment reflected Persian theological concepts that had already transformed Jewish and Christian eschatology. The detailed Quranic descriptions of paradise and hell drew on centuries of Persian-influenced development within monotheistic traditions. The Islamic emphasis on individual moral responsibility and divine justice reflected Persian theological concepts that had already influenced Jewish and Christian understanding of human participation in cosmic warfare. The Quranic teaching that every deed would be weighed and judged drew directly on Persian concepts of cosmic accountability. Islamic concepts of prophecy and divine revelation reflected Persian influence on Jewish and Christian understanding of progressive revelation through different historical periods. The Quranic teaching about previous prophets and scriptures drew on frameworks that trace back ultimately to Persian theological concepts. The Islamic understanding of prayer and worship as participation in cosmic struggle reflected Persian concepts that had already transformed Jewish and Christian devotional practices. Islamic emphasis on spiritual warfare and protection against evil forces drew on centuries of Persian-influenced development. Islamic concepts of community organization and religious authority reflected Persian influence on Jewish and Christian understanding of religious leadership and social structure. Islamic ideas about the caliphate and religious hierarchy drew on Persian-influenced concepts of religious authority as cosmic warfare. The Islamic understanding of law and ethics reflected Persian theological concepts that had already influenced Jewish and Christian moral teaching. Islamic emphasis on individual responsibility and divine judgment drew on Persian concepts of cosmic justice and moral accountability. Islamic concepts of conversion and religious identity reflected Persian influence on Jewish and Christian understanding of covenant community. The Islamic emphasis on conscious submission to divine will drew on Persian concepts of individual choice in cosmic warfare between good and evil. The Persian influence on Islam extended beyond theological concepts to encompass practical aspects of religious life as well. Islamic concepts of ritual purity, spiritual discipline, and community organization all reflected Persian theological concepts that had already influenced Jewish and Christian development. Islamic art and literature also reflected Persian influence on concepts of cosmic warfare and divine judgment. Islamic descriptions of paradise and hell, angelic hierarchy, and spiritual warfare all drew on centuries of Persian-influenced development within monotheistic traditions. The Persian theological revolution that gave birth to Satan as the personification of cosmic evil ultimately transformed how billions of people across Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions understand the fundamental nature of good and evil, divine justice, and human moral responsibility. The ancient Persian god Angra Mainyu didn't simply become Satan through mechanical borrowing or cultural imperialism. Instead, Persian theological insights proved so valuable and durable that they were creatively adapted and integrated into multiple religious traditions, creating synthetic understandings that preserved cultural identity while insights. The incorporating profound spiritual transformation reveals how religious truth often emerges through dialogue and encounter between different spiritual traditions rather than isolated development within single cultural contexts. The Persian contribution to monotheistic understanding of evil demonstrates that divine revelation and human religious insight can work through complex processes of cultural exchange and theological innovation. The story of how Angra Mainyu became Satan challenges contemporary assumptions about religious authenticity and cultural purity, while revealing the profound interconnectedness of human spiritual development. The devil who became central to monotheistic theology wasn't the product of single religious tradition, but emerged through centuries of creative encounter between Persian and Semitic religious thought. Understanding these Persian origins provides crucial insights for contemporary religious dialogue and theological development. The Persian influence on concepts of cosmic evil, divine justice, and human moral responsibility demonstrates that different religious traditions can learn from each other and create new synthetic understandings that transcend the limitations of any single spiritual framework. The ancient Persian theological revolution that created Satan as we know him today continues to shape how billions of people understand their daily struggles with temptation, their hopes for divine justice, and their role in the ultimate cosmic drama that determines the destiny of creation itself. The Persian god of evil who became Satan represents one of the most successful and enduring examples of cross-cultural religious influence in human history, revealing how theological insights can transcend their original contexts to become integral elements of diverse spiritual traditions. The Persian contribution to monotheistic understanding of evil ultimately demonstrates that religious truth emerges not through isolation, but through encounter, not through cultural purity, but through creative synthesis, and not through single revelation, but through ongoing dialogue between different spiritual traditions, seeking to understand the deepest questions of human existence. The transformation we've traced from Angra Mainyu to Satan isn't just ancient history collecting dust in forgotten libraries. It's a living legacy that continues to shape how billions of people understand evil, suffering, and spiritual warfare in their daily lives. Every time someone speaks of demonic temptation, cosmic justice, or the final battle between good and evil, they're drawing on theological concepts that began ancient Persia. Consider over 3 millennia ago in how this Persian inheritance manifests in contemporary religious practice. When modern Christians engage in spiritual warfare, binding demons or claiming victory over Satan, they're using back to Zoroastrian concepts of organized frameworks that trace directly supernatural evil. When Muslims seek protection from the whispers of Iblis through Quranic recitation, they're employing spiritual technologies rooted in Persian understanding of cosmic dualism. When Jewish communities observe rituals of purification or protection against evil influences, they're maintaining traditions that reflect centuries of Persian theological influence. The psychological impact remains equally profound. Persian concepts of cosmic warfare provide meaning and hope for people facing overwhelming personal struggles. Instead of viewing persistent temptation or repeated moral failures as evidence of personal inadequacy or divine abandonment, believers can understand these challenges as proof of their significance in ultimate cosmic drama. Their struggles aren't random suffering, but strategic attacks from organized forces of evil that recognize their potential for good. This reframing transforms victimhood into heroism. The person battling addiction isn't just fighting personal weakness, but resisting demonic forces seeking to destroy their soul. The community facing persecution isn't simply experiencing political oppression, but participating in cosmic warfare where ultimate victory is assured. The individual wrestling with doubt isn't just intellectually confused, but under attack from forces that fear their potential for truth. These Persian-influenced frameworks continue to shape how religious communities organize themselves for spiritual warfare. Churches develop prayer ministries focused on intercession against demonic influence. Islamic communities maintain traditions of collective recitation for protection against evil forces. Jewish congregations preserve customs of communal spiritual defense that reflect centuries of Persian theological development. The influence extends beyond organized religion into popular culture and individual spirituality. Horror movies depicting demonic possession draw on Persian concepts of supernatural evil that infiltrated Christian demonology. New Age spirituality often incorporates ideas about spiritual warfare and protection that ultimately trace back to Zoroastrian dualism. Even secular psychology sometimes employs frameworks for understanding temptation and moral failure that reflect Persian theological concepts. What began as ancient Persian theology has become the foundation of how half the world understands evil itself. The devil you know isn't Hebrew, Christian, or Islamic in origin. He's Persian, transformed through millennia of cultural exchange into the Satan that haunts modern consciousness. This isn't just academic history, it's the hidden architecture of billions of believers' spiritual lives, proving that religious truth often emerges not from isolation, but from the bold encounter between different traditions, seeking answers to humanity's deepest questions.